material which you've heard in the 3 lectures on the tapes that you've just seen present an entirely new perspective of the problems now facing the world. And people have asked, what is it in those tapes that make them so forceful and dramatic? After all, many of us know that these things are going on. And I'd put it to you that those are some of the factors that make them quite unique, because in essence, what we are presenting is material that people know is happening, but we present it in a new order that makes a dramatic impact. And in essence, the point is that a problem correctly stated is a problem half solved. So the next question that people raise is that much of it is very negative. We spend a long time talking about problems in the world and about the enormous crises that go from one side of the globe to the other, all of which is true. But I'd put it to you that in the negative aspect which you've seen, destructive though it may be, lie the seeds of a tremendous breakthrough. Because after all, the negative aspect of any picture is simply a reflection of the positive. What then can we deduce from what we've seen? The first point is that for the first time in man's history, the productive problem has been solved. We have now solved, through technology, problems that have dogged man through thousands of years. There is more abundance available than ever before, and if we can utilize it the correct way, it contains within it the potential to lift man into a new environment, probably the like of which has never been seen. Huge gluts now straddle the world, and yet many people are starving because they don't have access to them. In other words, the problem we're faced with is a distribution problem. But like any problem, provided man's ingenuity is focused on it in the correct way, and observing the correct rules, the rules of truth and righteousness, that problem too can be solved and take us through to something better. Well, people say, if that is the case, why aren't we making those steps? The answer to which is that the problem now facing us is not a problem of logic at all. It is a problem of power and a conflict of power. And alongside the great economic problems that we can see, we can also analyze and understand a tremendous power conflict as 2 totally opposite philosophies grip each other in what really is a battle to the end. The philosophy of freedom versus the philosophy of tyranny. And sooner or later, each one of us have to take sides in that battle, because all of us will be engulfed by its consequences before we're finished. So that raises the next question, quite obviously, which is, can anything be done? Can we move forward now into a situation where we can regain the initiative? The whole of the movement that we're concerned with, the League of Rights, is based on one premise, which is that individuals, observing the rules of truth and righteousness and acting together, can prevail against enormous odds. And already the signs of that are beginning to happen. There is a great regeneration throughout the world. There are more and more people looking for some lead through this crisis, with their hopes fixed on something worthwhile at the other end. And our invitation is that you should consider taking your part in that particular battle that lies ahead. Well, it's easy to say that, but the individual is usually overcome with a tremendous feeling of hopelessness at the sheer magnitude and size of the problem that confronts him. And I believe that that feeling of hopelessness is based on a number of fallacies which, if he can identify and counter them, will replace hopelessness with faith and hope. The first fallacy is that we need large numbers of people. And we have an almost hypnotic preoccupation with the idea that we must have thousands and thousands of people in any cause before anything can be done. And yet history defies the logic in that assumption. If you look back, you will find that all the movements that have shaped history, have changed the course of events, and often have altered the destiny of nations, have been small numbers of people with a firm goal, objectives, and some idea of motivation, who have in turn been able to shift events in which large numbers of passive people simply went along with what happened. Large numbers are not essential. A small number, highly dedicated, with the correct goal and the correct motivation, can accomplish anything. The larger the mob, the harder it is to get people involved using their individuality. And we are seeking a minority leadership of people who are prepared to commit themselves into service to provide the type of motivation that is now needed. And the second fallacy is that we have to use force or violence in order to accomplish our aims. And some people say the only hope now is to form terrorist movements or guerrilla units and try and counter the revolutionaries and play them at their own game. But if we're to adopt that particular choice, we become the very thing that we're fighting. In other words, there's no point to the battle at all. We simply become another group of destroyers trying to counter the first group. Alternatively, we have to use the instruments of a free and democratic society acting within the law properly, exercising our rights and our initiative, and I believe that we still have enough freedom to make that possible. Well then, it raises the question, what weapons have we got? And I would put it to you that the main weapon we still have is the use of our vote in a democratic society. But we have to approach the question of voting in an entirely different way. Now, if you go back and look at the process of the democratic system, it started before the time of Christ in the Greek civilization. In fact, the very word democracy comes from the word demos, the people, a Greek word. The Greek civilization was the first that postulated the idea that the individual should have some part in government. It was a novel idea and a unique idea, and the first time that man had moved to a point where he rejected the idea that a tyrant or a king or a chief or an emperor should make all the decisions and impose his will on the rest of society. So the first democratic meeting ever held was held in the floor of a valley in Greece, and everybody was in that first meeting. Men, women, strangers, children, animals, horses, and the sheer size and complexity was enough to make it impossible to get any decisions. But they didn't give up. They went forward, and the next idea was that everybody should go home to the area they lived. And in small groups, each should select a spokesman who would represent in the forum in Athens the commission which those at home had given him. And so the first democratic election that we know about didn't take place through a ballot box, but it was a type of ballot where a bowl was taken around, and whoever picked the short straw was told, well, now you're the Member of Parliament. Some reluctant individual perhaps didn't want to go at all, but fortune had made him pick that short straw, and he then was held to strict silence. A marvelous idea, if you can imagine politicians being silent at election time. And the people spoke, and they themselves worked out what they wanted, and they had to agree on what they wanted, and anything there was no agreement on, they discarded. But finally, they came up with a number of points that they wished him to carry out, and he was commissioned. Their decisions were inscribed on a scroll which was handed to him, and he was instructed to go down to Athens and to represent or represent those ideas on their behalf in the forum. But before he left his village, they took him round, and on the temple wall at the end of the village hung the sharpest and heaviest axe that they could find. And they told their new representative that if he did not carry out the wishes which they had commissioned him with, when he came home he would simply lose his head and be beheaded. And that turned out very good members of Parliament. Drastic action though it might have been, each member of Parliament came back to his home, gingerly feeling his neck and saying to the people, am I doing the right thing? Am I representing you as you want? Is there anything else you would like me to do? With his eyes focused sideways on the axe which hung there, reminding him of his duty. Now, it would be a bit drastic to say we should start beheading politicians, but it's not too drastic to say that we do need a sanction to bring them back to their true role as representatives of those who bid them to go on their behalf to the various parliaments or councils or governments which we now have in our modern society. And I'd put it to you that if we can move to a point where we turn our representative into what he should be, a genuine servant of those who elected him, this battle has been won. For the essence of the battle, once we have gone through all the mountain of material that you've seen previously, comes down to one simple question. Do we belong to governments, or do governments belong to us? If governments belong to us, they must be made to serve the wishes of the governed sooner than impose their own desires on the community. And if we can regenerate a control over our representatives wherever they may be serving, that gets back to those principles, the battle has been won. If we're not prepared to take the effort to achieve that result, we move forward to a situation where we have no vote at all, and the will of a dictator or a proletariat or some tyrant is imposed down upon us without any choice as to the future either for ourselves or for our children. Well, it's easy to make statements about those principles, but what can be done? How are we going to get our representatives back into that sort of situation? Well, the first thing is, I think we should write to them regularly, asking what they're doing and telling them what we want. We cannot make any claim to act as responsible voters if we're not doing that. How can a member represent his electorate if the electorate is not speaking to him somehow or other? And if we simply asked him questions about what he's done so far and tell him what we feel he should be doing, we are at least making a start in this first step to asserting our authority as voters in regard to our member. But we've got to go on from there. And let's have a look at one concrete example that did take place in one area of Australia, in the smallest tier of government. You might think the most humble, but I think probably the most important part of government, and that is the local council or municipality. In one area, a rather arrogant council was so used to increasing the rates whenever it wanted and taking decisions which weren't very popular that it finally earned the ire of the ratepayers, and a small ratepayers association was formed. Now, it's important to stress that the Ratepayers Association, while it might have reflected the views of large numbers of people, only involved a small handful of people who were prepared to actually take part. There was a lot of sympathy for it, but not too many people wanted to commit the time. The Ratepayers Association, having organized itself and established a small constitution and elected officers, waited till the council elections, and then it decided on a totally new approach, not only to their own council, but to 5 adjoining councils. And finally they ended writing a letter to 48 candidates standing for 5 different councils with 3 very simple questions. Dear sir, we notice that you are standing for election to represent us, the ratepayers, in the council. And therefore we would like to ask you 2 or 3 questions. The first question is this. Would you agree, if you're elected, that you should not increase the rates in our council without first calling a meeting of the ratepayers and asking if they agree? Because after all, they have to pay and have to live with the decisions that you make. Question 2. Would you agree that you are, in essence, a servant of the ratepayers, elected to serve their interests on the council, and therefore you should spend as much time as possible seeking their will rather than developing your own particular ideas? And question 3, in order to do that, would you arrange meetings, public meetings, with the ratepayers in your area, perhaps every 3 or 4 months, in which you can report on what you've done, give some picture of the budget and the financial situation, and then seek instructions from your ratepayers as to what you're to do on their behalf? We would like you to understand that your replies will be published in the local press before the election. And that last statement was enough to set off a real controversy. A number of councillors who had been there 20 or 30 years and had never had to face this before took umbrage at this new intrusion as they saw it into their role. And Councillor Brown, for example, wrote back to the Ratepayers Association saying, "I've been on the council 28 years. I've never been asked questions before, and I'm certainly not going to answer any now." Councillor Smith said, "My job is to run the council, not to represent the people. I don't like this sort of questioning." Councillor Smith said, "I think it's the highest degree of impertinence to think that you can cross-examine us on what we're going to do." And there were a number of answers in that vein. Some of the newer candidates replied that they felt they should try and represent the ratepayers and would certainly seek their opinion and their directions on what was to happen in council, and would report back regularly on what they were doing. But the majority of the candidates standing did not reply at all, which was a strange reaction in view of the fact that they were seeking votes in order to get them onto the council. The Ratepayers Association booked a page in the local paper. They hadn't got any money, so they drew up a draft advertisement, exactly what they wanted to say, and they took that round from one ratepayer to the next, right throughout the district, showed them the advertisement, and asked whether they would contribute a few dollars towards its publication. And within a couple of afternoons they had collected $400 or $500, and that full page appeared. The format of the advertisement was simply that right at the top they put the 3 questions which each candidate had been asked. Down the left-hand side in a column they put 48 names of the 48 candidates who were standing. And alongside each one they then put how he had replied. Councillor Brown said, "I've been here 28 years and I've never answered questions before. I'm not starting now." That went in the paper. Councillor Jones said, "My job is to run the council, not represent the people." That went in the paper. Councillor Smith said, "I think you're very impertinent and I don't think you should ask me questions like that." That went in the paper word for word. Those who had answered correctly and politely also had their answers published, and right down at the bottom a number of names. These people did not have the courtesy to reply to our letter. And as a subheading at the bottom of the advertisement came this statement: "This advertisement has been inserted as a service to ratepayers. Please vote accordingly, however you wish, using the information if it's of any use to you." And that was enough to change the whole voting pattern right throughout the area. People now had something concrete to vote on, and the result was that all those who'd answered in a slightly arrogant manner were voted right out, got very few votes, including councillors who'd been there many years. In one particular council, a totally new council took office. Not one had ever been on the council before. But the subsequent events made it worthwhile. Before the budget was brought down, before rates were increased, each councillor now felt an obligation, which he carried out, to call a meeting in his area of his ratepayers. And he asked their permission. Would it be all right if we increased the rates this year? And he was asked how much and what for and what was his reason. And if the ratepayers didn't think it was good enough, well, he was told, "We'd sooner you didn't. Keep the rates where they were before." And the whole atmosphere changed. The ratepayers were much happier because they saw that the councillor genuinely wanted to speak for them. The councillor was much happier because he felt he had the support of the ratepayers, who previously had always been sniping and grumbling and growling about what went on in council. The voting in the council elections went up, everybody felt involved, and the majority now felt the council genuinely belonged to them and was going to serve them. Here was a revolution in one small government really started by half a dozen people who'd got the right idea. But the same principles can be adopted in any type of election. And if in each electorate, in any nation, whether it's Canada or New Zealand, Australia, Britain, a small number of voters on a non-party basis started inviting all candidates in election to come before meetings of voters, to answer questions on what they were going to do, to report on what they had already done, to take instructions as to what they would do about taxes and laws and regulations that were going to come out, to ask why they had voted, to be asked why they'd voted as they had, we could begin to generate a totally new participatory democracy which used to be part of our system, but which now doesn't really exist except in name. In other words, we've reached the stage where we go to voting booths We look through a list of candidates, most of whom we've never seen or never met or never heard. We wonder which one is going to do the least damage, and we vote for him. We vote in a basis of fear. The opposite of fear is faith, and faith comes after a dynamic program where we get in the right position. So we are concerned with the establishment of participatory democracy, starting not in Parliament, but back in the electorate, and in each area we are looking for a leadership that is prepared to commit itself on behalf of our freedom and our children and the future of our country to re-establishing the principles of truth and freedom with which we started out. What then is the role of the League of Rights? The League of Rights does not promise that it's going to do the job for you. In other words, it's a different type of organization. It doesn't say, vote for us and we will fix the problem up. It doesn't say, put us into power and we will give you heaven on earth. But it does say, we are a service movement that can equip you and provide you the tools to do what you want to do in your area. You don't have to join us. We don't have a membership. But you can avail yourselves of the material which we provide. And that falls into a number of fields. The first is that in each country where the League of Rights is established, Canada, Britain, New Zealand, Australia, we publish journals, regular newsletters containing both information and coordination. In other words, we tell you what is already being done, what a group in one part of the country has achieved, so that you can benefit by the experiences. This is all available. And you do need regular information if you yourselves are going to be effective. We produce video programs, like the one that you've just seen. We produce a very big range of cassette tapes and audios. And we have a library which is available. We produce and have available a small number of lecturers, but we are supplementing their services with audio tapes and videos simply because we do not have the resources or the speakers to cover the tremendous needs which are now developing. So you yourselves can organize your own meetings and inform other people in your community using the tapes, if you see them as value, which we produce. We have a great range of books, and books and the printed word have a mighty part to play. Books that you will not see on your book stands, books that you won't find in your libraries, but highly important in the unfolding battle for freedom. And I would therefore like to mention a number of books that I see as particularly relevant to the material which you've seen in this lecture. The first book I'd like to mention is a book called Your Will Be Done, written by a former Australian federal member of Parliament. It simply deals with the nature of Parliament itself, the role of the Crown, the role of an upper house, the role of a lower house, the duties and legal obligations of a member of Parliament, and particularly how you can use your institutions to get the results that you want. It is a simple background that every individual needs if he wants to use his Parliament or to get the benefits from his Parliament to which he is entitled. We have a little book called The Breakdown of the Employment System, a lecture given in the early 30s by a brilliant British engineer who had perceived for the first time the impact of technology on the traditional full employment type of productive system. And he was looking through, as a result of what he'd already observed, to a situation where large numbers of people would be freed from the workforce into a new type of leisure age. Now, please don't confuse leisure with idleness, but a period where people could use their creativity in a new way and with greater freedom than ever before, having been freed and released from conventional wage-type employment which we've had in the past. It is a type of prophecy, which raises the next question, leisure itself. We have a little book simply called Leisure. 3 papers given at a seminar run in the mid-50s on the question of leisure from a Christian perspective. And it was out of leisure that many of the greatest attributes of our civilization sprung. The arts, music, culture, building, architecture, a whole range of activities, most out of a very busy leisure period. And properly used, leisure is a full-time activity. There are a great many things that can be done in your leisure period, and it's probably the most important part of your life. The type of environment we've now developed gives a greater capacity for that type of freedom than ever before, and those three papers focus on leisure from a Christian perspective. And then two little books that I'd like to recommend on our heritage. The first, called The Essential Christian Heritage, a small booklet tracing the development of the Christian ideal of freedom built into our institutions. How did we get our Parliament? What is a constitution and where did it come from? The history of Magna Carta, the concept of private property, the concept of a servant-type government or king. All of these were unique ideas which gave us what at one stage was regarded as the finest parliamentary system in the world. It's part of our heritage. It's been lost to many people. Many have never heard of it. And that little booklet is worth all that you spend on it. And alongside that, an accompanying booklet called The Foundations of Freedom. Foundations of Liberty, I beg your pardon, by the Reverend Canon Fellows, a Church of England clergyman, now a canon, who from, again, a church point of view deals with the whole development of the social order down through our history and how we got many of the institutions. They're two invaluable booklets. And last but not least, a little booklet called Light on the United Nations. Two young Christians went back and looked at the roots and the philosophy and the development and the personnel who took part in the formation of the United Nations, which to many is a symbol of peace and hope, but which is more and more widely recognized as an institution which is slowly subverting the idea of freedom and is in essence an embryonic type of world government. It has done more harm than good, and the reasons for this are highlighted and explained in the little book, Light on the United Nations. Those books are valuable starting points. They're only a starting point, and you have to build on them. But the most important thing is your commitment yourself. You can listen to all this material and understand it, but unless you take action, nothing is incarnated in the situation. On the other hand, half a dozen people doing no more than meeting regularly, perhaps once a fortnight in somebody's front living room, writing a few letters, can change the whole picture. And if we can find enough people to do that, we are going to move forward into a new age. We're going to break through this crisis into a situation where those old words still apply. We turn our swords into plowshares. We sit under our vines and our fig trees, and none shall make us afraid. And we can look forward to a world of peace on earth and goodwill towards men. It's a goal worth fighting for, and I hope you'll take your part.